In Revit, materials control how model elements display in views and rendered images. To see all of the materials in your project, switch to the Manage tab. In the Settings panel, click Materials to open the Material Browser. In the Material Browser, you can see a large list of materials. You can browse through the list, or you can search for a specific material by typing in the search field. Additionally, at the bottom of the Material Browser, you can expand Home and then see the material libraries that are open. In this example, there's just currently one, the AEC Materials library, and you can expand that to then access the various categories of materials and materials. For this example, I'll type tile into the search field, and then the list is filtered to just the materials that contain the phrase tile. Additionally, at the bottom, the list is filtered as well to show the materials in the material libraries that contain the phrase tile. In order to add a material from a library into the project, you can hover over a material listing and then click the arrow button where the tooltip says Adds Material to Document. And when you do, that material will be added to the project and will be available for use in your project. If you do not see a material that you need, you can create a new material, or you can duplicate an existing material. For example, when you right-click a material, there are two duplicate options. Duplicate material and assets, which will duplicate the material as well as duplicate the material assets. The second option is duplicate using shared assets. When you use that option, it'll duplicate the material but keep the same material assets. In other words, they will be shared between the new duplicated material as well as the material that was duplicated. For this example, I'll select Duplicate Material and Assets, and now I can enter a new name for this material. I'll change it to 8-inch and then press Enter. And I can simply select it. And when I select it in the Material Browser, then all of the material parameters will appear over in the Material Editor. There are several tabs. On the Identity tab, you can control the material name, as well as descriptive information, any product information that you want to add, and additionally Revit annotation information, which contains the material keynote parameter. On the Graphics tab, you can control the shading, which will control how the material appears in a shaded view. And then you can also control the surface pattern and cut pattern. For this example, under surface pattern and foreground, I'll click in the pattern field and it opens up the fill patterns dialog. And I can select either a drafting pattern or a model pattern. I'll select model and then scroll down and I'll select 8-inch tile and then click OK. Under surface pattern, under background, when I click in that field, you can see that only drafting is available. So for foreground patterns, you can select either a drafting pattern or a model pattern. But for the background fill patterns, you can only select drafting patterns. So that's something you need to be aware of. And then similarly, you could add a cut pattern if needed. If that material requires a cut pattern, depending on how it's going to be used in the model, you could specify that as well. On the Appearance tab, you can control how the material will appear in a realistic visual style, as well as when the material is rendered. And then there are also physical and thermal assets that can be modified, and those are used for analysis of that material. At this point, we have a new material created. Now let's take a look at how to create a new material library. I'll clear the search field here, and then at the bottom, I will expand the button at the left here, which says Creates, Opens, and Edits User-Defined Libraries. And when you expand that, you can choose to open an existing library. So if you already have a company material library that you need to open, you could choose that option, or you could create a new library. I'll select that option. And then for the name, I will enter Cert Prep and then click Save. And now I have a new material library created called Cert Prep. When I right-click the Cert Prep material library, I can create a category. So I could create a category of materials. I could rename it, several options here. I'm going to go back to the search field and type tile, and I'm going to look for the new material we just created, our 8-inch tile, and I'm going to right-click that material, and then I'll select Add To, and now I can see my favorites. I can add it to favorites, and then I can also add it to the new material library that we just created. So I'll select Cert Prep, and now I've just added our new material to the Cert Prep material library. Once again, we could add additional categories to that material library. Then we could go through here and add additional materials, and then we'd be able to use that material library in other projects. And once again, if you open up a new project, simply expand this button at the bottom and select Open Existing Library, and then all the materials that you added would be available in that project.